for instance, a lot of these, the Patriot Act, the senators in Congress were given 30 minutes to read a document which is 5,000 pages long, you know. And whether you agree with or disagree with Ron Paul over there, or the constitutional movement, I mean, I personally was always brought up to read a document before I signed it, you know. He's reading the Constitution. Ron Paul is reading the Constitution every day, apparently, you know. And since it only takes even a poor reading speed, you know, which you could accuse me of, because I like to look at the detail of things. It only takes 2 hours to read the Constitution, even with all the modern amendments. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility as citizens, right? That's where the power loop goes back to the citizens as being responsible. That is why there is the First and Second Amendment and the equality of principle thing, because it's the citizens' responsibility to read that document as the citizens' manual, as the highest law, you know, to enforce it, to make the public servants, be they political or civil servants, or even the armed forces, you know, the military servants of the nation, or the intelligence services of the nation, to enforce that law, you know, so that there's no sort of power group that becomes like a fifth column. Sorry, so I'll go back to the question. So at last I get to the fundamental question: should all laws be made by statute, and political servants of the nation be forced to actually read the laws they pass? Or should common law dominate, so that that law does not become dead law, not apt to the current context? But then you will end up with unwritten constitutions, or written constitutions so vast they will not be apt to the citizens' manual to laws, etc. In that in that context, subgroups in the legal system, like judges or power groups, might influence the invention of conventions, unwritten, unaccountable powers and secret rules which cannot be fully realised via the traditional process of making laws that are reasonable and based on consent and clarity and ethics, rational ethics, you know. And if you think that I'm being overly overemphasising the power of conventions and steering groups and organised crime, of course, you only have to look at the Westminster situation, where conventions have only just recently been revealed to the people in journalism, or the nation and citizens as a whole, that they actually existed, because the Labour Party, when it was last in, was trying to get those conventions made into laws, which obviously was going to be noted by the media. You know, it's sort of the bulldog for clarity, so to speak. But because we've now got a Tory government in, are new conventions being created, you know? I think a lot of the sort of ethical and reasonable, the rationalism within conservatism as opposed to Toryism or Thatcherism, when the EU was created, the rational side of like the one nation conservatives, you know, maybe you could say that FDR was a one nation sort of conservative, since he was in the Republican Party, but they sort of coalesced with Social Democrats and pan-European nationalists to make the EU constitution after World War II, to entrench English rational and ethical laws into the constitution in the way the German constitution and then the EU constitution emerged, you know. Of course, like the British constitution has the Queen, she has no constitutional role other than to sign payments or to papers, or to make sure that there's oversight over what is passed, less so in our system. In Germany, there is a separation between the executive, the legislature, and the president, who is just there to make sure that the government follows the law, and the Bundeswehr, the German army, armed forces, swear an oath to protect the constitution and to uphold the presidency. So it's even more checks in that sense than on the American president. So as I go back to the question, a law cannot be consented to everyone if it is unintelligible by the broad spectrum of reasoning people as citizens of such a great nation. If laws are unintelligible because of group-based linguistics, i.e. jargon, or to hide meaning and context, then judges themselves might not understand it, let alone those subject to the power of the court, right? Because it would be power if the judge doesn't understand it, because he wouldn't have the authority to interpret it. The outcome of any trial drives to responsibility to protect the process as well as the victim in order to arrive at justice, as well as the suspect, because the suspect might not be guilty, they could have the wrong person. That's why the ethical considerations were arrived at via a form of direct democratic assembly in Anglo-Saxon England, and why now with limited democracy we look at ethical implications in Congress's legislature as a form of collective responsibility between the state as servant of the citizen nation, because the judge cannot be influenced by any bias. At least that is the ideal, because the judge is not going to be held responsible. You can't even sue a judge in Britain for their judgments. They're not going to be held responsible. Their judgments and power affect others, not themselves. I think that's why balance of powers emerged from theory to practice to prevent abuse by anyone in government, and why the US Constitution put ultimate responsibility in the hands of citizens themselves. After all, US citizens for the most part choose to be citizens by swearing loyalty to US Constitution's principles. So that's my question to Hip Hughes History. I'm not a lawyer. I have done, courses in the past where law is sort of tangential subjects. I have read many law books, but I'm not a practicing lawyer. So I would like Hip Hughes History's view on what I've done as this open letter to him. And of course the original subtitle of this was US Constitution Precedents, Democratic or Anti-Democratic, and the difference between rights and liberties. Rights being natural, liberties being extra privileges that the state gives. And because rights being natural, they can't be given or taken away. Okay, thank you for listening to this series, and see you later on YouTube. Thanks. Peace. Through reason we shall unite. Bring the revolution home to England and Europe through constitutionalism. Thanks.